Has anybody ever called you a black sheep? And when they did, was it meant as a compliment? Probably not, right? It's meant as an insult or a put down. By the end of this talk, I'm going to convince you that you're going to want to be a black sheep and that you're going to want to get in touch with the inner black sheep and express it. Let's begin by looking at 6 different stories, 6 different people over history. 3 in the past, 3 in the present. We'll begin with Giovanni Bruno, an astronomer in the 16th century. He looked up at the stars and he said, wow, all those little dots up there, they're actually suns and they have planets revolving around them. This was a radical black sheep idea. Nobody else would have thought that. Meanwhile, this other guy on the right, Brian Greene, he says that there are many universes, maybe infinite number of universes. Today, Brian Greene gives TED Talks. Brian Greene has best-selling books. He's celebrated. In 1600, Giovanni Bruno was burnt at the stake. 2 different black sheep, 2 different periods, 2 different results. Let's look at another example. 2 black sheep computer scientists. They were both gay. Being gay, because you're a small minority of the society, you could call them a black sheep. Well, this particular one, Alan Turing, he was the one who helped discover the Enigma code. He was the one who helped win World War II. This other is Tim Cook. He heads up Apple Computer, the richest company in the world on a market capitalization basis. Alan Turing, he was driven to suicide after he was chemically castrated. Again, 2 different stories. Now let's look at 2 alleged sorcerers, black sheep sorcerers. One, Anne Hibbins. She was hung in Boston. Meanwhile, David Copperfield is a magician, also another sorcerer. He has a net worth of $1 billion. So what's the lesson from these 6 different black sheep, 3 from the past, 3 from the present? It's that it was a lot more dangerous in the past to be a black sheep. That's why we all avoided it. That's why it was an insult. You didn't want to be that. But today, it's a lot safer to be that black sheep. And that is one of the reasons why you shouldn't be afraid of being that black sheep. I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's safe to be a black sheep everywhere. There are some societies that are extremely conservative, that if you're a woman, for example, and you're not covered, you're a black sheep, and that's bad, and you could be stoned. In Japan, it's said that the nail that sticks up should be hammered down. And of course, we're all familiar with the one place in society where it is definitely quite conformist and you don't want to be a black sheep, high school, right? So there are certain societies and segments that are still, I'm not pretending to suggest that there are not places where it's still not safe to be a black sheep. But in general, in the 21st century, things have changed. And the risks of being a black sheep are much lower. Now, speaking about black sheep crazy ideas, I decided to go to Africa for 5 years. I just returned. I spent 5 years traveling to every single country, spending 5 weeks in each country. I went overland. I never left the continent during those 5 years. As you can imagine, after picking up 3,000 hitchhikers, I came back with a lot of stories. But I'm only going to share one story with you. One story about one particular black sheep that I think will inspire you as much as it inspired me. This particular black sheep is named Binta. Binta was born in 1992. We're not sure where she was born. She could have been born in Cameroon, Nigeria, or Chad. She doesn't know. She never found out. But the point is, the society that she grew up in is quite different. She was a black sheep for 4 reasons. First of all, she went to school. That sounds kind of crazy, right? Going to school as a black sheep, that's the most conformist thing to do here in America. Not where she's from. Women from her society, girls, should I say, stopped going to school after primary school. That's it. Primary school, you're finished. But she insisted to continue to go. Why did she not go beyond primary school? Why didn't she do that? Well, a lot of her peers were selling mangoes on the street, but she wanted to educate herself. But her mother wanted her to go through two important ceremonies that make her a woman. The first is that she had to have her clitoris cut off. So the day that her mother took her to a hut, she knew what was going to happen. It was a hut on the outskirts of her village, and there was an old lady there, waiting there with a razor in her hand. Her mother told her to lie down naked. Binta looked at her mother and said, "You know what? I'm totally into this fantastic, wonderful ceremony that you're about to go through. I'm right with you, but can I go to the bathroom first?" And so her mother said, "Go ahead." So now, in this part of Africa, the bathrooms are not in the house, they're outhouses. So she put on her flip-flops, and Binta went to the outhouse and then ran to the street, flagged down the first car, jumped in the car, and asked the driver, "Where are we going?" She says, "I'm going to Nigeria." "Great, let's go there." And off she went. She was 11 years old. 11 years old. Can you think of the balls that you've got to have in order to do that? Or in this case, the clitoris that you got to have. It's amazing. She went away, and for a whole month, she didn't come back. Finally, when she came back, her mom let her go and decided not to bring up the subject again of female genital mutilation, female circumcision. That's a black sheep idea, because where she's from, almost all the girls are circumcised. If you look here in Africa, the percentages, it's the majority in many countries, sometimes reaching 90%, have their clitoris sliced off. This is something that has to stop. Binta was a black sheep. She stood up to it. She didn't want to take it. She went off and found a way to escape. But it was going to be much harder to escape the second ceremony that her mother wanted her to go through. Marriage. Because where she's from, all girls who reach the age of puberty should already be married. That's right. You heard that right. 13 years old, you should be married. So, she didn't want that. Now, where she had been presented many suitors, her mother was showered with gifts from the suitors. One of them actually took her mother to the Hajj, the pilgrimage in Mecca. They wanted her daughter to be her second, third, or even fourth wife. Now, some of these guys weren't that great, but some of them are really hot. I mean, really kind of desirable. Like this guy who's got, a cow on the back of his motorcycle, a live cow, This is the kind of guy I think most girls in this room would really be into. But Binta was not. Binta was not into the guys with the cows on the back of the motorcycle. She wanted something more. And so she again wanted to be and expressed her black sheepness. The problem was how to do it. She didn't know I can't just run away as easy as I did get away from female circumcision. You can see the statistics. Where she's from, you are a black sheep if you're not married as a teenager. You're unusual, you're rare, you're different. And in villages, these percentages are even higher. And that's where she's from. She's from a village. So she devised a plan of how to get it. She thought, well, I have only two choices. Either one, I kill myself, or two, I make myself so unattractive so that no man will want me. And that's the option she took. You know what she did? She became an apostate. She decided to reject Islam, her religion. She said, if I become a Christian, I will no longer be desirable to all these men who want to marry me, men in their 40s and 50s. And she was 12. She did it. But then her imam, the leader of her mosque, wrote a letter. She had to read it because her mom is illiterate, couldn't read the letter. And it said basically, if Binta doesn't return to Islam, we will have to execute her. This was not a veiled threat. This wasn't a joke. This same man, 1 year later, would decapitate his cousin in the market square as part of Boko Haram. This same man, 2 years later, would blow himself up in Nigeria as a suicide bomber. He meant business. So when he told Binta, you better come back to Islam or we will kill you, he meant it. She decided to escape, to run away for an entire year. She didn't come back until her mom was, when she was 14, her mom died of natural causes. And she was an orphan at that point, at the age of 14. We'll get back to Binta's story at the end, because you're probably curious whatever happened to her. But first, let's focus on you. How can you learn from Binta? How can you become more like her? Well, 4 questions that you want to ask yourself. But first, you have to remind yourself that you don't live in Binta society. It's much safer for you and me to be a black sheep, to be different, to dare to be different. It's much easier. So don't be so afraid. Second of all, remind yourself that we're all drowning in information. White sheep are what? What's a white sheep? It's boring, right? It's boring to be a white sheep. Here you are with your text messages and all your messaging. You know, we're overwhelmed with information. Only a black sheep is, wow, look at that. There's a black sheep. That's interesting. So be interesting, be original, be different. So ask yourself these 4 questions to help bring out that inner black sheep. First of all, is there something in your mind? Are you stopping yourself from being? Are you saying, oh no, I wonder what my boyfriend will think. I wonder what my parents will think. No, I don't want to, I might fail. These are things that you're stopping yourself right from the get-go from doing. Second of all, if you're trying to bring that self out of you, ask yourself, what if I do the opposite of what everybody else is doing? All the sheep are going this way. What if I do the opposite? That's another way to kind of bring it out of you. As Mark Twain said, when you find yourself in the majority, it's time to question and think about it. Third question that you should ask yourself and realize is, what's the realistic worst case scenario? The worst case scenario of me giving this TEDx talk is that somebody from the audience jumps up and kills me. That's the worst case scenario, right? But is that the realistic worst case scenario? No. So a lot of times we get obsessed about the worst case scenarios when we should be thinking about the realistic worst case scenarios. It's not that bad. You're not going to usually be killed. And speaking about killed and death, think about what you're going to feel like when you're on your deathbed. Ask yourself, is my future self really going to be so worried about me stepping out on a limb and doing something different and being different from the rest of the people? Probably not. Probably your future self will encourage you to go off and be slightly different from the rest of the people, or even radically different. So these are questions that you should ask yourself in order to kind of get out of that zone. Now also, I want to make sure that not all black sheep are good, right? You've got Hitler, you got ISIS, you got Boko Haram, and perhaps one of the most worst black sheep of all, Justin Bieber. Oh, sorry, Justin Bieber fans? But seriously, folks, I'm not suggesting that just because you're a black sheep, you're automatically going to be marvelous and fantastic. Some black sheep are not so great. But the key thing is to be true to yourself and to realize that you might be closing off and denying that side of yourself. Now, one more thing. If Justin Bieber were here, or anybody else who are super successful, they're going to tell you what? They're going to tell you, just persist, go off on your goal, and you're going to succeed eventually, right? You've heard this stuff a million times. Just go after it, be a black sheep, and you'll succeed. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's not always the case. It's not always the case. Sometimes, when you try and you persist, you don't fail. You don't succeed. Think about it. Is CNN going to call you up and say, hey, we've got this guy who's mortgaged his house, given up everything. He lost everything. He never succeeded doing anything. CNN's not going to call them. TED is not going to call somebody up and say, hey, we'd like to present this woman who tried to be an Olympian, and failed, and never succeeded. Those are not interesting stories for us. So they're never invited, so we never hear from them. So persistence is important. But just remember this, that among persistent people, the successful ones, all successful people are persistent. But not all persistent people are successful in doing what they wanted to do, to achieve what they wanted to do. But what's important is that you pursue the idea for the sake of the pursuit. That you be a black sheep, not because necessarily you'll become the next Tim Cook, next Brian Greene, and you're going to become fabulously wealthy. No, do it because for the same reason that Binta did it. Binta did it because that's who she is. She didn't want to deny that. She didn't want to suppress that. So success is not necessarily a guarantee when you try to be a black sheep. But there is success in being true to yourself and not repressing that side of yourself. Now, I want to end with talking about where Binta is today, because you're probably curious. Binta eventually decided to change her name. Because when she converted to Christianity, her pastor said, "What would you like to call yourself?" Binta is a Muslim name. Would you like to have a different name? Without hesitation, do you know what she called herself? Rejoice. What a great name, right? Rejoice. And that's the name that she chose. I hope that you have learned and become inspired by this woman who's now 26 years old. She's not only come to America, but she's come to this very room. That's right. Binta is here. Rejoice is here. I think you'd like to meet her. So, come to the stage. Rejoice. She speaks 5 languages, but she's a bit shy and she doesn't like to talk that much. But the key thing that I want you to learn from her is how to be a black sheep. Because this woman means everything to me because she's my wife. Thank you so much.